Chris? You got any game playing plans, or you just you doing the
Finish up
running
my
thing?
video for the month. Trying to do 12 this year. That's it. Just 12. Just get something on the board. So
Put some points on the board. Do you know what your first video is going to be focusing it on?
yeah, it'll be about WoW.
Brutosaur mount or
No, taking on some lore stuff
oh, fun.
in a space where everybody can tell me that it doesn't matter, as opposed to going into a space where things do matter and everybody gets offended how you handle it.
Gosh darn, internet never changed. Joker, what are you playing, dude? What's been going on in your world?
Let's see. Final Fantasy 14 and all that nonsense. Space Marine, Destiny. I played the last couple of seasons so other people don't have to. I play bad Destiny content so you don't have to.
I've been seeing so much doomerism around Destiny, and it's
we had like 10,000 peak players or something like that the other day or whatever. It was bad. So
does it go away as a game? Do you think it dies?
Could a game like that go away?
So high concept level. Mm-hmm. If we're talking about Destiny, like kind of in a future whatever, if Marathon succeeds, right? Marathon comes out of the gate and makes all the money. Oh, Destiny's gone. Like, there's no question about it. Because Bungie as a studio couldn't handle developing content for Destiny by itself. So now I'm supposed to believe that they're going to do 2 Rise of Iron size DLCs a year and support Marathon. Really?
So they just
if
take
Destiny,
it offline?
I don't know if they take it offline. I just think they we're no longer supporting this game. You've reached the end.
Decline.
Congratulations. And there you go.
Managed decline. It's okay. Well,
managed
because
decline.
How much does the servers then cost them, especially if they've got, people, playing and buying things? I don't think the overall structure works well from a long-term monetization, but it's always kind of interesting because like Final Fantasy 11 is still going. It still has that subscription. It doesn't cost them much because they're not actively really working on the game that we know of, unless they decide to do something amazing and bring that back. But all that being said is that, the costs, it's handled, right? So they don't market it. They don't do anything. It's just there. It just lives and breathes. Destiny doesn't have a subscription. It doesn't have its source of revenue is them having new seasons, bringing things out, et cetera.
But I mean, like Destiny 1's still ongoing, right? And has been, for 5 years, and they haven't done anything with that. So,
right.
I could see it going on kind of in perpetuity. Now, if Marathon fails, which I keep seeing people go back and forth on Marathon. There's not a lot of hype about Marathon, but if Marathon ends up failing, I see probably Sony making the studio go dark, reinvest in Destiny because that's really the only IP they have, and either fixing Destiny 2 or relaunching the Destiny franchise as like a Destiny 3 or just Destiny.
What would you want? Would you want a 3 buy-in, or would you want just straight up Destiny?
So straight up just Destiny would be kind of cool. But I have to imagine that they would reboot it no matter what, right? If they went with a Destiny 3 or a Destiny. And the reason I think what we'll get is kind of more akin to like Final Fantasy and Realm Reborn.
Mm-hmm.
Right, where you had the first version, it sucked, and then they were like, okay, well, we're gonna work on this other thing, and we're gonna relaunch the game, and it's gonna be kind of tied to that, but also not. It's gonna be its own thing, and they would have to do that. They would have to build a game that is designed to last if they want to bring players back, because they have to get that player confidence back. And you don't get that by just relaunching the same game that you've been working on for, a decade. Destiny's pretty dated at this point, right?
Right. It's the same. I view it in the same way that Square Enix has done a huge pivot as of late, where they were launching games exclusively on PlayStation with Final Fantasy 16. And then you don't end up really getting that extra level of hype, because the hype, people have played it who wanted to play it. People who did want to play it, but wanted to wait till PC absolutely avoided everything about it. And so like with Destiny, you need that next round of marketing push, and you need that sales pitch as to why is this time going to be, worth reinvesting in this. They do have such a strong, I think the marketing on it would be so easy. It's like, we finished this saga. It took we did this. Lessons are learned. You love the gameplay. The gameplay was always killer. Well, the gameplay's here, but now we're going on this new saga, this new journey, new engine, built for the next 10 years.
All they have to say is that like Destiny 2 one of the big problems with Destiny 2 is when they designed it, they put it together in something like 16 months. I talk about this in that like mega 3-hour video. And putting something together in 16 months after a reboot, they didn't really have time to work on the foundation of the game. They just had to put something together. And at the time, they didn't really think about it. They were like, okay, well, we're going to basically put this together, throw it out, and then start working on Destiny 3. While a sustain team supports it with like its big DLC and then its small DLCs in between. They believed that it was going to have a similar trajectory as Destiny 1. But in 2020, I believe it was, that all went out the window. So now the word on the street is, the rumor, if you want to, hypothetically, allegedly, in somebody's opinion, is that when they had a content creator summit, they brought in a bunch of content creators and they asked the content creators, what would you rather have? Continue of Destiny 2 and we just keep trying to like reinvest in it, or a Destiny 3? The content creators suggested Destiny 3, which, if that's true, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard a company doing. Yes, let's ask a bunch of young people whose audiences or whose careers depend on their audience retention, what's best for the game.
That's what's best for them.
Yeah, it's what's best for them. What's best for the players isn't Bungie going dark for a year or two, or what's best for the content creators isn't Bungie going dark for a year or two. It's Bungie continuing to make content and just like hoping everything works out. What's best for the game would have been a Destiny 3. But we're like 5 years too late for that.
Yeah, it's interesting because we're seeing this play out with some other games, and we might as well just jump right into it. The show in and of itself, Chris, unless you have any objections.
No, we're doing it. We're already doing it.
We're already going. Screw the intro. Let's keep this rocking and rolling. And Sir Rule dropping 26 months of support over here on YouTube. Thank you. But what we're seeing this is like Dragon Age. That's one of the topics that when Mike in our little pre-chat, sometimes we have a whole group. He's like, are you going to talk about the whole Dragon Age, kind of thing? And I was like, honestly, I wasn't originally planning on it because I put out my video. I went through how I did the numbers. People called me, they're like, you don't know what you're talking about. And then as always, as that trajectory goes for every time I do this, well, EA just came out and it absolutely lost them a ton of money. And not to the surprise, because you had two factors. You had an incredibly long development cycle for that game. You also have 10-year gap between the last entry in the franchise and this one. And while the franchise did carry enough weight to get it to that 1.5, 2 maybe 2 million units sold with all this Christmas sales and discounts that they have run for the game, like that's not enough to recoup. But there is a serious risk, and we're starting to see that where they're like trying to bring back these franchises that have been dormant, and whether the market is wanting them or whether the game ends up not performing, it doesn't seem like that is going to be a good strategy. So this feels like, you're right, like out of sight, out of mind, where Destiny became like how people talk about the quote unquote golden age of MMOs back before World of Warcraft came in and just said, no, I think we're going to own this space for the next 20 years. Forever. Yeah. So what are your thoughts about that? Because like I'd like to get your thoughts on Dragon Age, because that's been an interesting story we've seen unfold in real time, especially as it relates to gaming. But there is, I think, some kind of correlation to what you're talking about with being 5 years too late for Destiny 3.
Yeah, so Dragon Age, I'm a huge fan. Actually, I think I got the art books back here. So I'm a huge fan of Dragon Age. I grew up like basically with the franchise, and and then Boulders Gate before that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you come out and we have Boulders Gate 3, and Boulders Gate 3 just sets the bar. And so you have people looking at Dragon Age, and Dragon Age comes out, and it's not a good game. Just like regardless of where you fall on different political spectrums, I don't care about that. Like, you actually play the game. It's not a good game, like on a technical level. The combat is just all over the place, and gets boring. Gets repetitive. And in a game
to jump in on that, just as a thought, because I've also seen people make a similar kind of case, and they bring up the fact that if you look at Dragon Age 1, 2, and 3, they're all so vastly different that they're really, like, everybody ends up saying, I really like the combat. I wish they'd go back to Dragon Age Origins, you know, something like that. Yeah.
Because, well, it's more tactical. It's like chess. It's people prefer that, but also you could switch between your companions and control your companions. So say you make a sword and board warrior, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you play 15, 20 hours as a sword and board warrior, and you just get bored with that. Well, instead of making a new character and playing the game all the way through again, you could just put a mage in your party and play as the mage. You can't do that. So the ability to not get bored of the combat just isn't there. You know, and I know that sounds weird probably for people who play like MMOs, and they're like, well, I press the same 5 buttons, you know, over and over and over and over again. But the MMO generally has other things that you're doing, right? Other things that you're invested in. You know, you're like, I got to get that raid armor. That's not really in this game. You know, the loot is pretty so you have all these different systems that are just kind of, you expect them in an RPG, but they're not fleshed out the way that they should be in an RPG, especially in a post Baldur's Gate 3 world.
Yeah.
And I know people say that's not fair.
World. No, it is. It's absolutely fair. And there's like no
but
way
that's
that people
where we're at. Like, deal with
it. Exactly.
You know,
like that's
it's not fair, but like, okay. And I think a lot of the, you know, negative press obviously didn't help the game, but at the same time, you know, whether it was deserved or not, you know, in some aspects, people are going to talk about how they feel about a game. If they don't like it, they're going to talk about it. And then you have like another crowd coming in and going, oh, well, it's the Streisand effect, right? If you tell somebody that they're like a bad person or a bigot or whatever for not liking something, then that's going to get more eyes on it, and you're going to get more negative press around it, and people are just not going to want to deal with it, like one way or another.
Yeah.
You know, like we've seen this kind of commentary around Wuklamot in Final Fantasy, right? Where like I played the game in Japanese, like with Japanese audio. So I didn't even know that the voice acting for English was bad. You know, I was just like, this character sucks. Yeah. And everybody's like, oh, how dare you? You're a bigot. And I'm like, but I play in Japanese. So like, what do you mean?
Yeah. The default go-to, it's an interesting shield that I've seen, especially that it kind of surrounds Wuklamot in Final Fantasy 14. And we've seen that where it's just like, we should be able to like equality is literally us being able to critique and say, I like this or I don't, but everybody wants to bring that back to like, oh, you're trying to attack the voice actor. In your case, you didn't even hear the voice actor. I haven't heard the English voice actor in this case. And so it's like, well, okay, but beyond the voice acting, regardless, the character in and of itself, people just didn't enjoy. I think also the hard pivot from you as the player being the focus on the story from ARR to Endwalker, you're the warrior of light.
Going to now we're like a mentor just didn't work.
An adventure, and you're just kind of going on. And I think no matter what, because the thing I keep coming back to with this expansion is that Pictomancer and Viper, super fun. Like those were like, I want them to go and do a pass over all the jobs, and I want them to change how the level sync system works. I was talking with Elio on his podcast about this very fact. It's like when you go and level sync in this game, you have this kick-ass job with all these cool skills, and it's super fun. And then you're like, okay, now all of that goes away. And I was like, just literally put a cap on it. Like, note that the maximum cap that you could put damage out per second in this dungeon is this. You just no more.
And they have the tools to do that because we have traits that increase buffing of your abilities, and they could just take away the traits. But I'm sure the spaghetti code doesn't allow for something that nuanced. That's not an excuse, but it is a reason, right?
Well, that's what I would say. I would actively be really interested because the jobs are so great. I thought the story was always going to be very hard for a lot of people who really got invested because it had such an emotional impact, but that came married to a decade of buildup, you know, and et cetera. And this is hey, we're starting over. And so that is also something, it's the challenge. We've seen so many companies do this. Like Chris and I have seen Phantasy Star Online 2. they decided rather than name it 3, they went with New Genesis, and then you as the player pick which version of the game you want to go in, and that game's had its own struggles. So it's like with these games as a service, especially the successful ones, it seems like WoW is perhaps the model that can, like as Chris alluded to, it's the dominate the space for all time.
I mean, WoW struggled for a while, from what I understand. I don't particularly play WoW. I played it like during Cataclysm and then fell off. But WoW, from what I understand, struggled for like the last couple of years, and then with the most recent expansion, what Dragonflight or whatever, got itself together, got its act together, and decided to, you know, actually give players what they wanted, and it's been a revitalization for the game. And there is a room in these spaces for like Dragon Age or Mass Effect or you know, even Destiny for that, but the developer has to go in and, you know, create a game that is fun first, right? Like, you know, if it's not fun, if you build a fun game, people will come, people will enjoy it. I mean, the Arkham games, right? They way back, way in the day, that was largely word of mouth. Yeah, Dragon's Dogma won largely word of mouth. You know, these games were successful because they were just good games. Dark Souls, I believe, you know, was another one of those games that got popular because people enjoyed it, or people enjoyed watching people enjoy it. And, you know, we all started, you know, seeing these games played, and now they're super popular franchises. You have to win the players' trust back. And unless these developers are willing to reinvest in that, I don't think they are. And Bungie, you know, going back to that, or even, you know, these EA companies, because EA stock is like, they may not even get the chance to reinvest. I don't know if you've noticed, but every time Bungie or Sony brings on a Bungie team member, they make a big press release. What video game enjoying person cares about that? You know, like, do you care that Bungie brought, or that Sony brought in Bungie's CFO number 87? No, nobody cares. You know who that's for? That's for the board of directors. That's for Sony's board of directors. That's for investors, right? They need to make the Bungie acquisition not look like it was a colossal waste of money.
Based off the amount of games as a service games that have been canceled by Sony,
by
it seems
Sony,
like they had that goal of having 10 games as a service games as part of their library, and
now I think 10 have been canceled at this point.
That's such a weird way to get to games as a service. Like games as a service should come relatively organically out of, like, World of Warcraft came out of, we hope a community likes this, but we don't know if they will.
Right.
Final Fantasy 14 came out of, we hope a community will like this. Evidence is that they won't. Like, it was a gamble.
Warframe.
A Realm Reborn was a gamble. Warframe is a gamble. These successful communities, you don't get to just decide that. That's such a weird way to come at the math. Like graduating college and being like, I'm going to have 2 good jobs and 10 successful relationships.
It's like Anthem, right? Anthem did the same thing.
Anything else.
It's like Anthem goes, well, we have this flying mechanic, and we clearly have this audience that likes BioWare games. So if we like put a half-finished game out, which is what games as a service means to me at this point for 90% of games, it's a half-finished game, and they're just gonna like give DLC? Well, if you talk about like a game supported by DLC in the long term, does that make Borderlands a games as a service game? Does that make, and I mean like the original one? Does that make Dragon Age a games as a, like the original? Because if you look at Dragon Age Origins, you had like that game has a ton of DLC. Well, if you do that model, that's great. You know, hey, more of the thing that I like, cool. But I don't think they set out to, you know, I don't even think that the developers of those games or the publishers of those games would consider them games as service games. But if we look at the model, they inherently are, at least retroactively.
It's just such a weird, backward way to get there.
Yeah, no, 100%.
I mean, I understand the whole like begin with the end in mind, but games as a service does not appear to be true to that. All of the successful long-term running games had a fan base first, instead of like, I'm pretty sure Anthem said in their marketing it was a 10-year game. Like, they called their shot. And like, I just don't know that as gamer, like, I don't want to really be told what I'm going to like for 10 years.
That they did.
Like, how about let's let 10 years go by, and then if I liked it the whole time, you can go, hey, did you know you liked this game for 10 years? Oh my gosh, I can't believe that.
I've been here for
whoa. Like, that's just weird that they would tell me I'm going to like the game for 10 years. It wasn't even out when they said that. How do you know I'm
well,
like
I think this is one of those things, like, people, you go through, like, even the comments on my most recent videos, like, why do you care? Destiny's dead, blah, 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 blah. Destiny is such an important flashpoint in gaming, and Bungie is just such an important studio. The 10-year marketing, that started with Bungie, right? That's like, this $500 million invested into the creators of Halo to make this, like, MMO Borderlands amalgamation thing that we don't actually know what it is. Where behind the scenes is way messier. But that was the marketing. That was what sold people. They're like, oh, this is cool. And now every game has we're going to do this for 10 years. We're going to do this for 10 years. We're investing in your future. You'll be able to build a community and friends and, all that stuff that you did in Destiny. We're going to do that. But without all the baggage, it'll be better here. You'll want to do it here. And that's the other thing. It's like, it's the ask. You're asking me to invest 10 years into a game just up front. What? Are you insane? Not why
I play WoW. I think they're looking at, like, I play WoW because I have a 20-year-old character now. No, like, it was fun from day one. It was always fun. And it was fun to share with friends, but it was even fun when my friends stopped playing. I still kept playing. Like, it was just intrinsically fun. So this idea, it's the wrong takeaway.
Right. Well, it's Bungie's motto, for example. It's used to be we make games we want to play, or something along those lines. But now it's we make games that inspire friendship.
No.
What does that even mean?
No. Nope. Most of my friends have kids. I don't have kids. Very few of them have times. I don't play games for the purpose of friendship. My friendships very rarely get to revolve around games now. I play games because they're fun. Just go back to playing games that you want to play. And if friends want to join, friends want to join.
The most social interaction I want to have with most people playing these games is like, okay, we got the raid done. See you never.
Yeah, I'm on voice chat with people I know. Yeah, at this point, I'm not actively looking for somebody random to talk to and hear their kid in the background while they ignore their wife's requests. Which I was like, I think that was the last, like, I was like, all right, I'm mute all. Like, don't ever put me in any voice channel. I'll jump into Discord and hang out with the community. I'll be on Xbox chat with Chris and my brother.
Playing,
and
like,
them.
Call of Duty or something, and like auto added you, like, you're automatically in like team chat, and I was like, no, how do I turn this off? Where's the mute button?
Y'all brought up an interesting point. I'd like to kind of talk about it. I see a couple people in chat. We got Crash saying they've actually been enjoying their time. They're more engaged than they typically are. And Chemistral says that they promised 10 years. They'd be lucky to make it 10 months. The game that don't care about player retention, just aim to create a fun experience, are the ones that actually last 10 years. It is this weird kind of aspect, right? Because we see, like, with Boulders Gate 3, it is a moment in time, whether people want to think it's fair or not. It's here. People are going to look at it and they're going to make judgments of future games based off of what that game delivered. The thing I knew was going to happen, and the thing that did happen, is that game doesn't have DLC and people like microtransactions, and people love it so much. They're like, how can we give you more money? And their answer ends up being like, I'll just go buy another copy of the game, as a thank you. But that's the reality. It's like they didn't focus in on trying to get that player retention and that money from you every month. So they just focus in on, let's just sell a game and people will show up and want to play it. And they delivered that. One thing we're seeing right now, and I don't know if you guys have been following the No Rest for the Wicked devs. That game came out in early access. I'd like to get your thoughts on early access games in general. And they just announced today their Breach update. They've got a big kind of Wicked Inside. It's their big presentation, almost like a live letter for the Final Fantasy 14 community, going over the next update, which will either be sometime in March or sometime in April. They're coming up on 1 year. But their whole approach is no microtransactions. They want to sell a game, and then they're going to make expansions or 2 or 3 or whatever, and they'll sell you that game. So the story and your characters go on, but they were like, because people obviously with the long gap between updates at this moment for tons of reasons why both I know and have communicated enough to be legally safe. So it's like there have been things going on with Private Division being sold off from Take-Two that has actually caused a lot of the delay and a lot of the frustration. But yeah, you see that kind of dead game kind of meme pop up where gamers are frustrated because it has been such a long time since the last big update did happen in August. And so that all being said is that their business model, I think, is the right one. I think we are seeing a return from this microtransaction monthly active user mindset, because I think people like myself, like Chris, like when we talk about this, have grown to a level of fatigue where you're saying, I just want to boot up a game and want to play it. I want to be able to pause and I want to be able to set it down and not have to sit here and feel like the game is forcing me into this avenue. But my first question for you, especially Joker, because we haven't had the chance to talk about it. Do you play early access games? Why or why not? Or what would get you? Like what is that proposition that you think is fair?
If a game's early access and I'm interested in it, of course I'm going to play it. I tend to view games like that, not as harshly as I would like a full $60 package that's out. I'm like, okay, they're still making the game. They're taking feedback. This is going to be a dumpster fire. Generally, I go in with the mentality like, this is going to be bad. Okay. And if it's good, then it's like, oh, hey, I think, what is it? Path of Exiles 2 is in early access. I haven't tried that yet, but
Path of Exile 2 and the rest. Boulders Gate 3 was in early access. I think,
and I
for
played
5
the early
years.
access, and
yeah,
that was
rough.
so surprising, by the way, because like you play the early access of Boulders Gate, and then you play Boulders Gate, and it's literally two different. Like the actual story is different.
Yeah,
and I was like, whoa. Sometimes you get bait and switched like that, right? So it all depends on the game. It all depends on the studio. If it's a game that I'm going to buy anyways, why not, right? If it's a game where I'm like, I feel like this is like, say like oh God, what's that space game that's been in early access for like literally a decade?
Star Citizen.
Star Citizen. Yeah. If it's something like that, I'm like, no, like, yeah, I don't know these devs. I don't trust them with my money. Even if it would be like, okay, here's $60 so I can meme on the game. Like that's still probably too high of a price to ask. Yeah.
Well, good news. They don't sell it for 60, but you can spend tens and tens of thousands of dollars,
right?
If you so choose, which is
so it
really interesting
on the game. But I think that's just like with any game. It's like, am I going to waste my time doing this? My time's valuable to me. Yeah. Am I going to, I could be painting Warhammer miniatures, But as far as like general practice, as long as it's not a glorified demo, and the developers are actually taking feedback from the audience and implementing it and improving the game, then I see no problem with it. However, when we have games like, I know we just talked a lot about Anthem and Destiny, but it really does seem like games like Anthem, Destiny, these live service games are just early access by another name. It's like, how long did it actually take Destiny 1, for example, to get good? Well, Age of Triumph. Like realistically speaking.
Yeah.
Warframe was in beta for
14,
how long?
2.0.
Yeah.
And
hey, Warframe, it's a little bit different because it's always been free to play. But people are still buying microtransactions, right? Like, and they just, they're doing it hoping that supporting the developer will get them a better game. You don't know. So it all depends on how long, I guess, the early access is, because if a game stays in early access for years, basically, then what's the point? At a point you got to like release the game.
What's that timetable? Like, what would you say the ideal timetable for early access?
I think you like early access in like the last year of development. Obviously development is a long drawn out hard process, but I think like last year and a half, and then if you come into anything that's like, oh crap, our netcode really, really sucks. We didn't see that coming because we've just been playing it internally. Well, we have to redo that. Or, oh, hey, our crafting system is really bad and it's not like jiving with players. Or our like, what was it like in 1.0 Final Fantasy? They had like a really weird gathering system where it was like a ton of different mini games that all of them sucked. And like in 2.0 they took that out. If they have something like that, and they have to like walk that back because it's just not fun, then that's, obviously you need enough time to implement that change. And I think that's, it should be close to like when you're ready to actually ship. Not we're going to like sit here like 4 years later, still in early access, still in beta. There's a point where it just becomes ridiculous.
I assume Fortnite's still in early access or beta or whatever they call it. I just assume.
I think they finally
that could be wrong. They were in there so long, I stopped paying attention to it.
What was it? Minecraft was also like that.
Minecraft was in it for a while. I bought the alpha for €5. When was that? 2009, 10, something like that. And I think it maintained that alpha for like several years, but I don't remember the timeline. But as an alpha, like it was pretty bland. So it's a drastically different game. I think you look at a game that's been around 10 or 15 years and you regret choices made early on. Final Fantasy 14 being a big one, right? They have a lot of 1.0 regrets. They have 2.0 regrets. We talk about spaghetti code. It's this blank check for like any mistake. We can just immediately be like, well, what are you going to do? But if you spend so long, like perfection is the enemy of good. Like if you spend so long now worrying about what it's going to be like in 10 years, now you've got this perfect system that can't afford to be broken or manipulated. And the advantage of it never being perfect is they've been able to adjust the formula throughout. And so like when you look at how much the formula on these long running games that have healthy communities are, they can look like a drastically different game in the way they released. So this idea that you're going to release it and it's going to be good to go, that's not really how the big ones got there.
Oh yeah, that's not what I'm necessarily saying, that it has to be perfect out the door, but like Destiny 2 didn't release finished, like nowhere near, right? And I think there's a difference between releasing in like a beta state and releasing as like, okay, this is worth your $60.
Sure.
Yeah. Like Space Marine 2, I think is a pretty good example. You got your campaign, you play it from start to finish. You got your PvP and your, horde mode, whatever, or your like replayable missions. And that's a package. Now, of course, that's going to change as they do balance patches and they introduce new stuff. But it is like you have this complete package, and that complete package can be built on, and systems can change as players need them to change. But also at the same time, it was worth the money. It was worth the investment. It didn't like feel like I was like, okay, I'm paying $60. Let's hope this eventually gets good.
Do you think that game sticks around long term?
I don't think it necessarily needs to.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. That's a valid statement. But there are games that we don't think are going to stick around a long time that just do. So do you think it has a long life on it? Like a God of War doesn't have a long life on it. That doesn't make them bad games.
Right.
But
I think I think right now we see that it has like kind of a niche community. And I think it'll stay with that like niche community. And I think people will come in and like, it'll be that game that like kind of like, again, using a lot of Final Fantasy references, people like watching people play the Final Fantasy campaign, right? On like, YouTube and Twitch and whatnot. Sure. I think we're going to see with like Space Marine where people just like seeing people explore Warhammer 40K, and that's just a really good entry point. I think if you want to talk about legs for like an entry point into the franchise of 40K just as a whole, it has tons of legs because it's just a really good organic point that here's 40K for your average Joe. You don't have to explain anything. You just give them this game and you get it.
As somebody who hasn't played any 40K games, I know that Space Marines 2 seems to be highly praised. Is that something that, I should add to my library?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
No question. Done. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I wonder if that's on GeForce Now. I think it might be. That ends up being kind of my litmus test. It's like I just need the flexibility to play the games where I want, and as long as there aren't hurdles into that, then I get a game. But I'm not like one of the things we were talking about early access. I'm in early access for Pantheon, early access, for PAX Day, and these are like sandbox MMOs, slow going games, and I actually find myself like really enjoying my time, but my time has to be at this specific spot. And that doesn't seem to work right now with my lifestyle, where it's like if I could fire this up on my Steam Deck, because they're bringing actually Steam Deck's getting it's a native GeForce Now app, just having that flexibility to sit down and play wherever the heck I am when I have that ability, like that actually makes makes all the difference. And that's where I tend to gravitate my video game time investment to games that make it basically that adhere to that, either with crossplay, cross progression as a kind of a key feature. We're looking at Xbox Play Anywhere as a thing that they're amping up, where it's like, okay, I bought it on my Xbox, it's also my PC. That means I can also stream it now on my handheld. It means if I want to sit down and play a game, I can just pick up and play the game. I'm not having to jump through all these daggum hoops. So that's just how my life in gaming has gone. So I'm seeing positive movements in that direction. But what's interesting is that, like, while Destiny is a cross progression game, it's also now owned like by Sony, who has right now notoriously kind of tried to push we sell a console, and then maybe 18 months later, our game rolls out on PC. Do you see that gap for PlayStation shrinking under this new leadership, especially with how Destiny is currently struggling?
I don't know how, because again, we look at the Destiny deal, and the Destiny deal is like one of the most bizarre, weird. Was there money laundering involved, hypothetically, allegedly, in somebody's opinion? Because no, like think about it, $3.6 billion. I think at the time that Bungie was bought, it was actually worth 2.2 billion. Yeah. So it was like bought for like 1.4 billion more. And that 1.4 billion more was supposed to go to employee retention. It did not go to employee retention.
That's a lot of money for employee retention.
Yeah, you could basically pay everybody $1 million a year for like 10 years.
I assume it wasn't evenly spread. I assume it was 3/4 to CEO retention.
Oh yeah, right. Pete Person gets a new car. But then now you have to explain, though, like with Bungie's basically falling out the bottom, you have to explain this to the board of directors, and not even just the board of directors of Sony, the investors. Well, you also have like all these other legacy Jim Ryan policies falling through, right? Mm-hmm. He was really invested into games as a service games. He thought that was the future. And then we have Concord, and that failed. Oh, but that was also seeded with Bungie developers. I'm seeing a pattern here. That was what, $400 million disaster piece.
Yeah, at a minimum. Yeah,
at a minimum. And so they've got to sell that to the board of directors. They've got to sell there was a God of War MMO, there was a Horizon Zero Dawn MMO, there was a Last of Us games as a service game. All of these have been canceled now, and you have to imagine at least $200 million a piece. Somewhere between 100 million to 200 million a piece. So they're bleeding all this money, but then you also have to remember Sony isn't just video games. Sony's also this movie branch, and then all their superhero movies that they keep trying to do fail. The Madam Web fail. Venom, all right, but did it make Marvel money? No. What was the last one? Craven, yeah,
Craven the Hunter.
I heard that came out, and then that was it.
I think Madam Web, and then you see that the Sony Spider-Verse without having Spider-Man at all.
Yeah, who wants to see that?
Nobody, apparently. And then the movies themselves were just bad. DC has also been, they went through Their DC's journey was weird though, because they'd have like Aquaman, $1 billion, like big hit, Batman vs Superman. What the hell was that? It's just like,
well, it's actually kind of like what Chris was talking about earlier. It's like you start, like they started at the Justice League. We have the Justice League, and then like, but didn't work up to it like, you know, Marvel did.
yeah.
So, you know, it's, you see a lot of companies go, well, we want the ending now. We want the payout from the ending now. We don't want to put all the work into it.
Right.
We want to build the thing kind of, and then, but we don't want to do all the foundational work required to build the thing. And we want the money from the thing because everybody else got the money from the thing, but they were dumb. They paved they paved it for us. We could get there without it because somebody already did it. Right. No, that's not how that works.
It feels very like WoW came out and then all of a sudden everybody's like, let's do the WoW thing, and we're not going to do it as good, and we're going to take people. You know,
we're going to take 4 college friends and keep them up like all hours of the day, and they're going to hire people they can't afford, and they're going to stay up all hours of the day, and they're going to get in wildly over their head. Is that the recipe you're talking about? Because that's the actual recipe behind WoW. It doesn't have anything to do with IP. The IP really wasn't there. It doesn't have anything to do with the fact the game looking at all like it does today. My God, you could not predict where the game would go from there. It got there organically.
Yeah, but you still had, you know, the Warcraft games, you know, that like built the foundational of the lore in the world, and people were like, man, this is cool. It's why like the Riot MMO may actually have legs.
Because it's based off of
hypothetically, allegedly,
right.
may.
Assuming that game actually even exists. It's the beautiful thing about the Riot MMO, and I think people have shifted, like, because for it was like the Ashes, a creation that's going to do it. Oh, it's the Riot, and it's just as vague as these games can be, means that people can fill it in with, here's my perfect MMO experience. It's going to relive all of this.
Take place
is there a narc I can watch?
Universe?
It is. It's supposed to take place in the League of Legends universe, and so they can build in
already
on that
invested.
lore. Yeah,
and that's about the amount of lore you want, right? Like WoW came out of Warcraft 1 through 3, but Warcraft 1 through 3 is not the same as like a Star Wars MMO or a Lord of the Rings MMO,
right? Yeah.
Where like you've got big shoes to fill. It's like, there's some broad definitions of like what are the kind of characters that players will play as.
We got orcs, we got
that, and so it was pretty basic compared to, you know, now it's supported by 42 novels and a movie, and it got there slowly. I think the Riot MMO is intriguing. Do you guys know of a creator that's kind of their narc? Can I like follow this journey?
Probably narc
now. And they'll quit.
Now that narc is retired from Ashes of Creation, maybe he'll
do it. He was a truly great shepherd of the pre-Ashes Ashes. I would appreciate if he would cover the Riot MMO so I could follow that journey.
Is there anything to even cover about the Riot MMO?
There was
nothing to cover about Ashes.
And yet
he put out like 2,000 videos for 4 years.
Geez.
On a game that
Ashes of Creation. Some developer tweeted that they're going to work from 9 to 5 today. Let's go.
And then the game came out and he goes, I'm not covering this anymore.
That's awesome.
Came out in alpha. Like we're talking about, like, I like what you said, Joker, about MMOs kind of being a different way to brand early access, because that's the argument I've made. I was like, it really takes 3 years before the MMO is ready. You know, like whenever, no matter what, like it's going to come out, people are going to like it draws a lot of attention. That cools off dramatically. And this is the same thing with Final Fantasy expansions. This is the same.
Everybody talks about Final Fantasy and Heavensward, right? And it's like Heavensward's so good. Heavensward's so good. But if you like listen to people talk about the way the game actually played back then, they don't like it. It didn't really find its feet until like End of Shadowbringers, or not End of Shadowbringers, End of Stormblood, beginning of Shadowbringers. You know, is from general consensus of what I understand. And now I didn't start playing until
I think the clumsiness has to be there. The clumsiness has to be there. That's what gives us something to overcome. There has to be something that's fun about it, and then something for us to overcome. When you remove all the friction, that's something WoW has struggled with at certain times, is they've removed all the friction, and then people are like, oh, this is boring.
No,
and
people
they have
like
to add
the friction because it's character.
You have to add the friction back. I don't know. I think a League of Legends MMO is like the right amount of lore.
Yeah. I think it's at least a good idea, especially with as popular as Arcane was and whatnot. Like, so you've definitely got that brand in the collective consciousness of the average Joe. So it's like, oh, I don't want to play League of Legends, but I like Arcane. But so I'll play the MMO, right?
They had a TV show too, right?
Yeah, that's the Arcane.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
that's great. I've been told that by the time they're done, League of Legends is going to be the worst part of that universe.
Yeah, probably. I mean, it already is, right? God, I remember playing League like out of 10 years ago or something. I think I was a GameStop manager back then. That's forever.
Ooh, GameStop. You and Chris share that relationship.
I didn't work in the stores. I worked in corporate loss prevention. That's a different ball game.
Yeah.
That's not nearly as good of gamer cred as working in the stores.
Is working in the stores gamer cred? Because most people I know that work at GameStop didn't know anything.
It's part of it. Neither do gamers.
Now I want to get to some comments that you had on one of your videos, Joker. But before we do, did either of you guys check out the Xbox Direct, the developer Direct yesterday? They announced Ninja Gaiden 4, which I think seems to have drawn a lot of excitement. They remastered Ninja Gaiden 2 Black, added that to Game Pass. The thing I thought was interesting that I've seen kind of spin out of that event was Xbox is publishing Ninja Gaiden 4. And we've seen people try to label that a first party game because of this publishing deal. And honestly, it just to me is another signal of the direction that Xbox is going. It just tells me that I'm going to be able to play Gears of War on my PlayStation or on my Switch too, for all that matters.
You want to go ahead? Because I've been yapping.
I don't think that labeling a publisher immediately makes you first party. There are a lot of indie studios out there that need a publishing arm, and that can continue well beyond the word indie. So like, I don't know that single-handedly makes you first party. I don't know where the line is though. Like fully owned developer and publisher designed exclusively for your platform. Let's go with like Wii Sports. That's the definition of like first party. There is no other way to receive that. You know, you move to things that were like organically bred in-house, things like Mario, that's still first party. And then as you get all the way over here, it's like, hey, there's a third party studio that, you know, maybe is self-publishes and is a cross-platform. That's not. Where the line is really blurry in the middle. And it has to do a lot with ownership. So where does it get published? Like, where all does it get distributed to? And then who controls the IP moving forward? So the game direction and sequels or DLC or live support or whatever, who's in charge? I think that starts to be the indicator of, are we first party or not? Is that a fair definition?
Yeah, I don't disagree with it.
So if Sony's the publisher here, how much ownership are they taking? Are they just a distributor? Or it sounds like no. It sounds like the IP is still going to be held elsewhere.
Yeah, Koei Tecmo still owns the IP, as Skrillex confirms. Microsoft's just going to be publishing it, but it just feels like this is just more of Microsoft publishing games everywhere. Like
Amazon could publish. If you wrote a novel today, Amazon would publish it for you. That doesn't make you an Amazon writer, does it?
I mean, I think it does, and to a degree. I don't think it makes you first party. I don't think it makes you an Amazon employee. But if you have something, if Amazon published something for you,
like if you write Brian the Catholic Gamer and have it published by Amazon Books,
one sold, Mom, thanks.
So at what point do you become Amazon owned? Is that when they like say, hey, we're going to start paying you a salary to write the second book?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Well, I think like in the terms of video games with like, say, like Ninja Gaiden or whatever, if it's optimized and plays better on Xbox because they have that Xbox support and they've had it, since the beginning, then obviously I'm going to, as a consumer, want to play it where it plays the best, right? Like, yes, okay, cool. I can play it on my PlayStation. It'll probably play just fine, but it's going to play better on my Xbox. So why would I get it on my PlayStation? Is because the PlayStation's was plugged into the TV. I can change an HDMI cable. So I think it does come down to what is the benefit to the consumer, based on if it's who's publishing it. If it's Sony publishing it, but it's published everywhere, well, I'll probably want to get it on my PlayStation because it'll have better support there. And I think the first party then comes down to who is providing the support for the game after market.
See, I think of it as more just we're seeing the beginning of the battle for marketing rights being one of those key differentiators. Yes, it's everywhere, play it wherever, but anytime Ninja Gaiden shows up on TV or on a YouTube ad or whatever, you see that Xbox publishing. And it's just like bringing in that subtle, like, hey, this game's really quality. Oh, Xbox published this one. And I see it more that competition, like while, they now own Call of Duty, as a franchise. And I think as a part of some leaks or some information, the numbers come out that it costs like $600 or $700 million to make, a Call of Duty game, which it makes that money. Like it's worth that investment for them, clearly. But I think the bigger payout for them is actually that every Call of Duty ad, everything they can do, bundling it up. It is that marketing right that Sony had for so long. Sony had the marketing rights for Destiny at the start of it. So I remember seeing all those ads.
Yeah, with Hawkmoon and whatnot. Where it was exclusive.
Oh, and that also was a big screw you to players because like, okay, cool, yeah, you can play it, but then you have exclusive content. And then Sony was notorious for that. Xbox, I think, started that war, and then they eventually got out of that business. And Sony was like, "That's a great idea. We're gonna keep going." To great success for them as a business, but as a player, like I definitely felt
coach third party with
they'd have modes
deals for content.
They'd have exclusive modes like in Call of Duty for a year. They're like, this is so by the time the next Call of Duty's out, you're already like, but I want to go play the new Call of Duty. I don't want to play this mode that has now just been patched in.
Yeah, I would almost say it's anti-consumer, but I guess at the end of the day, you have a choice. But
they had extra loadouts. I know that. Like you got like an 11th loadout instead of 10 or something like that. Which in the current Call of Duty, I don't even use loadouts. I just use the one over and over because it doesn't stick around when you prestige.
Yeah, just the fact that they do that, it makes me not. I don't like invest in loadouts. It's like, all right, just gonna play.
It's also much easier this time because your gun itself has a loadout. So when you equip a gun, it goes back to having attachments the same way the last time you used it.
Nice.
But before I get totally derailed, like, does that make it a first-party Xbox game? All they did was buy it. Is Call of Duty now a first-party Xbox game?
Yes.
I think that's kind of
okay.
It's one of those. It's like asking if something's black or white when it's actually orange.
Because all they did was purchase it.
Because Microsoft's entire model has been like, and this is just Microsoft in general. It's always been like we publish like Windows and Word and whatnot, and you can use it anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And they've dominated the PC market by doing that. Like, yes, there's Linux and these other things that people can use. They don't. Even like I know people who have Macs and they like buy like this thing that allows them to use Windows program stuff on it.
Mm-hmm.
So
you also have weird stuff where like Microsoft can make money off of Microsoft Office. Google distributes their equivalent of that product at no charge. So
right.
Are they comparable products? Apple does it, but only within their ecosystem. So the pay model is totally different because it comes from purchasing their hardware. Like that's where they make their money. So right. You have a software company, an advertising company, and a hardware company who all have three competing products. And so within gaming, I guess the equivalent there is kind of noting games like Counter-Strike or FIFA, where they're not subscription-based games like World of Warcraft are like, even subscription-ish, which most MMOs fall into, like you're spending a relatively consistent clip of money. They're just like gambling generators. So the purchase is totally unrelated to the game. It's just a constant money draw. I think it's odd to kind of equate different products within gaming, because like I think of Counter-Strike and FIFA as more related than not from like a business perspective.
Right.
But then when we look at Call of Duty as a game, you'd be like, oh, well, Battlefield's its notable competitor. But Battlefield doesn't have nearly the same marketing engine and release schedule that Call of Duty does.
Right. Battlefield tends to be the I don't like Call of Duty, but I want to play a military game.
So as we start to define like, well, what is first party? Is it purely an ownership question?
Yeah, I think it's who gets the lion's share of the profit ultimately at the end of the day.
Is it profit or is it control?
Both, I would say. Because like, okay, it comes out on Sony. If Sony wants Microsoft to take something out of the game, they're just going to tell them to take a long walk off a short pier. At the same time, if Sony published a game and it was like the Final Fantasy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which isn't Sony, but it was exclusive to PlayStation for a while. Well, then probably Sony has a little more say on that than, say, Microsoft would.
For sure. They absolutely have.
Yeah.
Sony has absolutely had an impact on Square Enix. The Square Enix is not Sony owned.
Right, exactly.
I know we're getting like way off into semantics here, but like that's where the gray line is. Like it's
semantics.
Super obvious when you pick a game that's like very clearly first party, it's all the way over in this category. When you pick a game that's clearly not, but like that line in the middle is what's interesting.
Yeah. It's always like the devil's in the details on this sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So
speaking of devils and details, you had gotten a couple interesting comments on some of your content. Mr. Marty O'Donnell weighing in. Do you want to give everybody kind of the scoop of what went down and why?
TLDR is I did this video that was like 30 years of falling upwards, a Bungie story, and it's like almost 3 hours long. And I basically go in and I'm like, here's the receipts for how Bungie has managed their game managed their development studio since basically before Halo. And we just go, kind of era by era, and you see the same pattern reoccurring over and over and over again, where management gets distracted. And during the era of Halo, they were able to succeed because they had insanely talented developers. Right. You can it's called failing upward for a reason. Management can fail upward if the team that they're like going, okay, now you have to work 80 hours in a week and you get no sleep and you don't get to go home because we got to make this deadline. All right. So I go through all of this, and Marty O'Donnell actually commented, and he's like, and then me and him have kind of a back and forth. And he's like, Sai, I watched the whole sad saga. Of course, I know the many things you got. So one, Marty O'Donnell watched my 3-hour video. That's kind of like,
that's really cool. Right.
And so he knows the things that I got correct, and he knows the few things I got wrong. So one, that's like, okay, well, there's things that obviously I had to make assumptions on. But and this isn't me like being ego or anything. If I got anything wrong, it's because the sources that I was using framed it in a very weird way, like the Vice article. And that will come into play here in a moment. And he's like, a lot of the trajectory, like Pete's trajectory and influence for the company, like look at the story that he tells about Bungie, like go look at Pete Parsons and stuff like that. And then he also says that my instincts about Jason Jones probably right. And my instincts are Jason has like all these ideas. He's like an idea guy, and he gets really passionate about like projects, and then he gets bored. And moves on to the next thing, and then the next thing, and the next thing. And then it's like the development team's, bag to carry, essentially.
It's fun being an idea man when you don't have to then execute on.
Yeah, when you have like the majority, when you're the majority shareholder, of the company.
Yeah. I've worked with guys like that where it's like I'd have a boss and we would get stuff done as long as he was not in the state. But if he was ever in the office, it was all chaos. Like we would pause projects that were 2-3 weeks away from being able to deliver,
right,
just to start something new because he was the boss, and have to sneak away to try and finish that. Or we would just have to be like, well, yeah, we'll get back to that when we can get back to that.
Yeah, you need that person in the room who can say no.
Yeah, and I never had that. I tried to be that guy, but it didn't work out.
When Alex Seropian, who was the other co-founder of Bungie, so you had Jason Jones and you had Alex Seropian, and together, to like use a Final Fantasy analogy, because that's I assume your general audience, the two together are basically Yoshida. But you take Alex Seropian, who left during the development of Halo 2, and you lose the guy who says, no, we're not doing this.
Mm-hmm.
So all you have left is the unbridled idea guy. And then, so one of the things that Marty says that I didn't necessarily represent correctly, which is where I think he's like, okay, one of the few things that I got wrong is the ODST kerfuffle. And basically the way that I portray it is like, it's a bunch of petulant man children dragging their feet, because that's what the Vice article came off as.
Mm-hmm.
And the TLDR on that is they originally, when they made the deal to separate with Microsoft, they had these 3 buckets that they had to do. They had to do Halo 3, they had to do Halo 4, and then they had to do something in the middle. Originally, it was this Peter Jackson game called Halo Chronicles, because they were going to do a Peter Jackson Halo movie. Everybody remember that.
Mm-hmm.
That fell through. Now, Marty O'Donnell said that he knew at the time when they were making the contract that Peter Jackson was going to flake out on them. And so there was a line in the contract where it was like, okay, if Peter Jackson flakes out on us, we don't have to make this middle bucket. And it was in like the first couple of contracts. Come the contract that they actually signed, it wasn't in there. So Microsoft had removed it. And sure enough, when they make Halo 3, they're making Halo Reach because they decided not to step on 343's toes, making Halo 4. So they're like, we'll go ahead and make this prequel. They come back and they're like, okay, you still owe us this game. And so that's why they were like, well, no, we don't. We had this deal in our contract. And turns out that actually, no, Microsoft had changed the contract and they didn't look it over, and they agreed to basically make this 3rd bucket. So then they had to make Halo ODST. I still think that there is a bit of petulance to it if you read the Vice article, because you're like, okay, nobody wants to work on this game. And I'm talking Halo ODST. Nobody wants to work on it. They still have to fight for resources every day.
Mm-hmm.
That to me just screams petulance. Now, obviously, they're not petulant going into it. They feel like they're getting screwed, but it is a lot of like office infighting, and that can almost be the downhill fall of Bungie. It's a lot of power struggle. It's a lot of egoing. It's a lot of infighting. It's a lot of, I know this, I know best. And then you don't have the leadership that goes, no, we're doing it this way. We're at the 11th hour. We have to cut it. We're doing it this way. And so Marty comes in and, talks about that. But one of the, without like going too much over, one of the things that I was actually really happy about was I just kind of asked randomly, like with no context. So who is the Elric Amel-Nibene fan at Bungie? And it turns out it's Jason Jones. Well, the reason I asked that is because you go through all of Destiny, you go through like even Myth, the Elric stuff is like, it's actually just Elric Amel-Nibene fan fiction. I'm not even joking. It's pretty blatant. So, that was cool to know. But the way that Marty kind of categorized Bungie after Microsoft is like, he doesn't regret getting Bungie out of Microsoft. He regrets that he couldn't get Microsoft out of Bungie. And you see that with like Pete Parsons, a lot of their lawyers, stuff like that. Those are Microsoft people. So, we talk about like liking Microsoft, but Microsoft also has kind of a negative edge to it as well. Every company does. Every company wants to make money. And if you prioritize making money over making like good games, good, stuff that is value to your customer or value to your employees, you end up in a place where, hey, you know what? I got to give Pete Parson props. He sold Bungie for $1.4 billion more than market cap just before the game fell out because they weren't supporting their actual game.
Exactly. The one thing interesting about that as kind of a final thought, because I know it's 4:00. It's time for us to wrap up the show for the week. Thanks everybody for being here. Like, sub, and hopefully we'll see you live here next week. But it seems like the common denominator, and this could just obviously be anecdotal, is your game studio, do they answer to the gamers or do they answer to the shareholders? And so I think that we've seen a lot of indie, a lot of AA really succeed because they have to. Like, there isn't a pile of money to save them, but then they also don't have to go answer for why some, update or why it's taking longer or why the cost or this to shareholders, because they don't have any outside of, like, most of them are absolutely privately owned that are producing these AA's, with like exception of Sony with, Helldivers 2, for example, but they're kind of really focusing in on that. Like, who do you answer to at the end of the day? Do you answer to the gamer, in selling that product? And if you don't sell that product, then you don't have a company. Or do you answer to the shareholders, who then you have to go, and what we're seeing with EA, it's like, yeah, it's gonna dip. And then the question is do they learn from this? Do the people, buy the dip? And then, it's like, hey, we're good. The dip was bought, and we're pleased with that. And we're going to keep on, just trying to produce content for the shareholders. It was Silicon Valley as a show. They kind of teased and alluded to that. It's like, what's our product? It's like, no, this isn't our product. Our product is the share that's on the market. Like, that's what we're selling. This just happens to be something that we put an ad out for. I was like, oh, that feels true.
And you mix that with studios buying their own hype. I mean, how many times have you heard BioWare magic, Bungie magic, Square Enix magic? It'll just work itself out in the end. And as technology becomes exponentially more complex, it doesn't.
Yeah, I think it's that actually becomes a red flag. There's like, gamers are picking up on patterns. It's like, oh, they said 10-year game. It's like, okay, you had me until you said that. Now I'm concerned. What's the plan here? How do we know? Do you mean you're going to make me wait 3 years before it's time to go and play? Do you have the money to make it 3 years into it? Like, because if you don't, then it's kind of like, I selfishly don't want to watch season 1 of a show, even if it's popular, because it's like, you tell me when it's renewed for season 2, and then I'll be interested, because I don't want to get to the end of it and be like, well, dadgummit,
Game of Thrones.
What do you mean there's not another season? It's like, okay, now I'm lost. Anyway, Joker, where can people find you, man?
You can find me on YouTube at Darkside Royalty, or on Twitter at DSR_Joker.
Chris, how about you?
Right here, every Friday except next Friday.
Oh, okay. I need to make sure I get a stacked panel. Miss my Chris. All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. I hope that you have a wonderful weekend, and hopefully we'll see you guys in the next thing that we get on around to do. And be sure to go follow Joker for his Destiny and more insights, especially Final Fantasy. We always love talking to Joker. Thank you so much for making time for us today. But until next time, peace.
Hey.